Priya, give me some straight answers about what the Pentagon is preparing for.
Well, that's a great question, Katie. And I think the problem right now is that we don't have a lot of answers about what exactly is happening next. But I think all signs are pointing to, as you mentioned, that the United States is moving more military assets and support troops into theater, potentially preparing for more kinetic action. So what exactly does that look like? No one knows just yet, because what we do know is that with the 11th day of consecutive airstrikes from CENTCOM on Iranian targets, not much has seemed to change. Iran is still able to launch their retaliatory strikes on different Gulf countries that are hosting U.S. forces. And as we heard from Secretary Hegseth this week, that they're also being supported now by Russia and China, which was not much of a surprise. But as you mentioned right there, and as we heard from that Republican lawmaker, it's been extremely difficult to get any straight answers about what's going on, not just by the press, because we aren't having any press briefings, but also from briefings over on Capitol Hill. You know, it should be some sort of obligation to these lawmakers when you're asking for billions and billions of dollars to continue funding this war, to have some level of transparency about what's happening here, especially to prevent potentially more service members from dying.
Do you have a sense of when the last time the Pentagon went to have a closed-door meeting with anybody in armed services or intel or maybe the Gang of Eight, Priya?
That's a great question. You know, it's been difficult, as you can imagine, to get any answers from people inside of the Pentagon about what's going on. I have spoken to them about, you know, why is there this discrepancy in the number of wounded troops, as you discussed, and they have sort of tried to minimize that and tell me that, listen, these are really minor injuries, concussions, and someone stepping on someone's hand. All of these service members have returned to duty status within 24 hours. And when I've asked about reports about, you know, battle damage in some of these countries in the Gulf, they've told me, well, we can't say that. That's a matter of operational security. And if we say that publicly, then that'll give Iran intelligence on where they should be concentrating their efforts. So then I've gone over to the Hill and spoken to lawmakers on both the House and the Senate Armed Services Committees and asked them, are you at least receiving any answers to these questions in a classified manner? And lawmakers on both sides of the aisle have said that that information has only come sporadically in the last 5 months.
So, John, you've been in government. You've been in these sensitive areas of government. What do you make of the opacity?
It's very, very disappointing. And I think it does a disservice not only to the men and women in uniform who are performing these missions, but to the American people that they're charged to defend. The Pentagon has an obligation to explain to the American people how they're spending their tax dollars, but more critically, how they're using their sons and daughters in combat. And this issue of, well, we don't want to talk about it because then the Iranians will know. Believe me, the Iranians know when they're hitting a target and when they're not hitting a target. I mean, that whole operational security justification for not coming clean about strikes elsewhere in the region is just doesn't hold water.
What do you think of the purge that's happening also at the Pentagon, John? We just have some more news from MS Now. 2 officers say they were forced out for questioning policies. Their removals seem to mark a departure from an American military tradition of officers delivering clear-eyed assessments so Pentagon leaders can make the most of informed decision. This is Priya's reporting, by the way. John, what's going on with that?
This is really, really deeply disturbing, Katie. And we're talking about changes to senior leadership that are going to take us a generation or more to recover from. We are purging really good talent from the United States military at senior levels. You can't grow those kinds of leaders overnight. It's going to take a generation to regrow them. There's at a time when we are involved in a war in the Middle East. We are still working our way through how to support Ukraine. There's plenty of challenges in the Indo-Pacific, and we are firing generals and admirals left and right for no justification whatsoever. Now, Mr. Hegseth will tell you it's all about merit, and yet he won't explain why these people have failed failed to meet the standard of merit, which leaves you to believe there's something more behind it. Perhaps it's identity politics, the very thing he claims he's trying to fight against. So I'm very worried about this. And the last thing I'll say on this is it just further risks the politicization of the military, which prides itself on being apolitical. But the message being sent to senior officers in the military right now is you can stay around as long as you subscribe to the MAGA agenda. And that is very, very dangerous for the country.
I wonder about morale, too. Let me play the president just a couple moments ago, again, seeming to diminish the number of lives lost in this conflict.
We were in Vietnam for 20 years, lost thousands and hundreds of thousands of lives, but thousands and thousands of lives. We were in Afghanistan for years. We were in all these wars that you heard about for years and years. We were, I called them never-ending wars. Well, we're in for 4 months, and I had a very sad day yesterday. I went to Dover, 4 great American patriots killed. That's 18 in 2 wars, and 1 is too many, but it's 18, whereas in Vietnam we lost 200,000, we lost thousands and thousands in Afghanistan, we lost thousands in every war, the Korean War, thousands, and these wars all lasted for years, and we want to get it over with, and we want to do it right, but we have to do what we came to do.
Paul?
He diminishes everything. And when he says we were in Vietnam, he was not in Vietnam, and he wasn't in Afghanistan, and he wasn't in Iraq. And I think he constantly has this strategic priority of diminishing casualties, of diminishing injuries. Say, oh, they're just headaches. Well, headaches later become traumatic brain injuries, which can be debilitating and create an invisible injury that we deal with for decades.
Which, by the way, happened last time he was in office.
And look, I don't love hearing from Hegseth, but we should be hearing from him daily. It's great that you have Admiral Kirby on because he reminds everyone how often we used to hear from him from the Pentagon. And in a time of war, you're not just talking to the American public, you're talking to military families. And they want to know what's going on. They want to understand the cost of war. And they want to understand whether or not their people are coming home and what they're coming home to. And I've made this point a couple times in the last few days. You're also not hearing from the Secretary of Veterans Affairs. So what's the VA going to do to take care of a whole new generation of veterans who are going to come home with a whole new kind of injury?
What do you think of the president taking that one family of a fallen soldier with him yesterday to that rally in Georgia?
I think it's inappropriate. It politicizes the military in a way that is dangerous, but also consistent with their strategy.
And speaking for the victims.
Yeah, I mean, that's the most egregious kind of propaganda, to speak on behalf of the dead and assume that they were a part of your political agenda. We worked for decades to separate the people from the policy, and he keeps jamming it back together in a way that's bad for our military, our national security. And most of all, it's bad for our troops, because then when a war becomes unpopular, people turn on the troops. We've seen that before. They shouldn't do it. We should separate it. But that's what we had to unpack after Vietnam.
So there's the diminishment of how many American lives are lost. There's also the diminishment of the lives and the well-being of the people in the country that we're attacking right now. The president has talked about committing war crimes, bombing infrastructure like bridges and power plants. Here's Marco Rubio not ruling it out as well.
Do you rule out striking civilian infrastructure?
I think I saw, guys, I saw Arachi, their foreign minister, who the other day say or something about their policies, an eye for an eye. The president's policy is a head for an eye. I mean, honestly, that's what it's going to be. I mean, they will pay a very heavy price for the things they're doing. They're already paying a very heavy price.
Eamon.
It's unfortunate to hear the United States, which is a country that espouses, at least publicly, that it believes in the rule of law, that it believes in a certain military way of conducting wars in accordance with human rights and international law, to have a Secretary of State, to have a president who boasts about destroying the country and sending it back to the Stone Age, civilizationally destroying it. We have our own reporting now. MS Now has its own reporting that actually reports on how the U.S. military has been targeting some infrastructure inside of Iran, including escape routes. There was, in the southern part of Iran, a bridge that a community was using to be able to get out of the danger zone that was destroyed. And our reporter spoke to one of the family members who has relatives here in the U.S. who are now unable to get out of that danger zone. So we are now not only endangering the lives of American service members who are paying this price, but we now know, as well as we saw with the school children, civilians in Iran are paying a heavy price. And our president and our Secretary of State are openly boasting about these war crimes.
By the way, they still have not been able to confirm from the podium
Right.
that we did that to the school, even though all the evidence points in that direction. There's also just the future aspect of this. When we don't have regard for human life, when we look callous in places, we pay the consequences later on. I mean, you experienced this in Afghanistan. I mean, the terrorism that was born against the United States in the Middle East because of the way we treated them. How concerned are you about just the forward-looking consequences of what might come from the way that they're talking about Iran and the willingness to bomb civilian infrastructure and to commit what would be considered war crimes?
Yeah, and look, I will let the military experts speak to that, but part of the reason why we adhere to international law is because it also protects us. It protects our troops. When our troops are, God forbid, captured in enemy territories, we don't want them to be tortured, and that's part of the reason we don't want to torture people that we capture when we are in wars. But at the same time, when you justify killing and targeting civilians and infrastructure and civilian power plants and bridges and roads and what have you, it then sends a signal that there are no rules to warfare. It then sends a signal to the Iranians that they can target a desalination plant in the Gulf, in which if they did hit a desalination plant in the UAE or Saudi Arabia or Qatar, millions of people who rely on that water would suddenly not have access to clean water. And they will look at the United States and say, we are doing to your allies and to your resources what you did to our own country.
Yeah.
And when we do that, we are eroding the kind of rules that we all want to abide by, even when we are engaged, unfortunately, in military hostilities.
And it also makes them fight harder. Right? When people think they're going to be treated well, they give up. Right? And there's a strategic imperative to knowing that we're not going to torture our enemy combatants. I was in Iraq, not Afghanistan.
I'm sorry
which is I think there's something else that I remember that's important. And having Admiral Kirby here is, where are the embeds? They've canceled, press briefings. They've eliminated access to the Pentagon press corps, but they're also not doing embeds. In years past, you'd have reporters on the ground with units talking to troops, sharing that perspective. That's been eliminated.